Hello and welcome to Turbo 360. In this tutorial series, we're going to build a podcast search website. It's going to look like this, where visitors can search for podcasts in here, and the results will show up over here. And when the visitor selects one of the podcasts, the most recent tracks will show up over here, where you can then stream the audio from the most recent tracks of that podcast, the most recent episode. We're going to be using Node.js and Express for the server as usual. And on the front end, we're going to use React.js on this project. So this is going to be a good introduction to React. We will not be using advanced React concepts, just the basic intro concepts. So if you're new to React and you're trying to get familiar with it as a front-end UI tool, this is a good intro for that, especially since we're going to be using some server integration as well. So we're going to be doing front-end and back-end in this series. So this is a good full-stack tutorial. This is not for complete beginners, so if you're a total beginner to programming, you've never coded before, this is going to be moving a bit too fast. This is a good tutorial for those who have been doing some self-study for a while, so somewhere around 6 months or so, maybe to a year, and you're trying to gain some familiarity now with more modern front-end UI libraries like React and full-stack Node.js and Express. So that being said, you're going to need Node.js installed on your machine. So if you don't already have that, head over to nodejs.org and click on the LTS and go ahead and download that and run through the installs. We're going to be using Turbo for our hosting environment. So if you do not have an account on Turbo, head over to turbo360.co right here and go ahead and sign up on the bottom. And this is free, so you don't have to worry about paying for the hosting. And we will be deploying our projects to Turbo for the hosting environment. And also, if you're watching this video on YouTube, check the description for the download link to the theme. This is a theme we're going to plug in, and the download link for the theme will be in the description of the YouTube video. Or if you're watching this on the Turbo site, head over to the project, the tutorial page on Turbo, and the download link will also be in the description there as well. Like I said, this is not for total beginners. If you're completely new to coding and JavaScript in general, this is going to be moving a bit too fast, excuse me. If that's the case, just head over to Turbo and click on the tutorials page where you can find a lot more beginner tutorials where we explain things in much more slower and greater detail. So particularly this would be a good place to start basic Node.js and Express if you're totally new to the full stack JavaScript environment. Okay, that being said, let's head over to our terminal and let's get started. I'm using a Mac OS, by the way. If you're watching this on a Windows machine, some of the commands are slightly different, but wherever that's the case, I'll try and remember and make sure that I point those out. So the first thing we need to do is install, we'll check our Node version first. So I'm going to check my Node version. I'm running 12.18.3 on this machine. Check your NPM version as well. 6.14.8 for me. So if you have these version numbers or higher, you should be good to go. If you have a lower version number, you probably should update. You might be able to get away with version 10, but it's generally a good idea to update just because. We need to install the Turbo CLI, or the command line interface, which is going to be the tool that we use to interface with our Turbo environment for deployment. So basically we're going to be using that for deploying our project to our server. So you need to make sure you have that. If you're running a Windows machine, the command is npm install -g turbo CLI. This is if you're running a Windows machine. If you're running a Mac OS or Linux machine, you need to add the sudo right here in front. So make sure you have that checked off before you go ahead and run the command. I'm going to run it right now. So it's going to ask for your password. You're not going to see the password entered as you type in, so don't let that throw you off. And I don't think the Windows machine shows the password, so I think that's only for Mac OS and Linux. So if you don't see the password prompt on Windows, that's okay. Just go ahead and run the command. And make sure you have this version number installed or higher. So if you want to confirm the version number, you do Turbo and then version. So I'm running 0.39.5. If you're running a CLI version that's less than this, maybe you have it installed from a previous tutorial or something like that, go ahead and run the install again and just get an updated version just to make sure you have everything, all the functionality that you need in this tutorial that we use. That should be everything we need for this tutorial, so let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to change directory to my desktop, and I'm going to create the project using the Turbo scaffold, which gives us a very bare bones Node Express application right out of the box with a lot of sort of default configuration options plugged in. Makes life a lot easier just to go ahead and get started. So we're going to go ahead and set up a project called a pod search. So this is how we create our new project using the Turbo CLI, the scaffolding engine. It's going to create a project here on your desktop or wherever you are doing your work. I'm going to CD into that right now, and I'm going to open up the project in Visual Studio. Of course, you can use whatever editing tool that you like. So here I am with the project open in Visual Studio, and here you'll see, like I said, a very bare bones Node Express application that works out of the box. Except we do need to install the dependencies. So before we go ahead and run anything, the first thing we need to do is Npm Install to install the dependencies of the project, and then we can go ahead and run it. So while it's installing, let's comb through this real quick just so you have a good idea of the architecture. So we have our package.json where we have our dependencies declared as well as our dev dependencies. As well as a couple basic scripts for running and installing and things of that sort. If you look at the app.js, this is where we configure our routes right here. And for the request response cycle, right here we have two routes already configured by default. We have an index route and an API route. We're going to remove both of these and use our own instead. But before we do that, let's just go ahead and make sure we understand the architecture. So these routes are being imported from the routes folder right here, where we have our API and our index route. And the index route is the one that's rendering the home page, which you can see going back to the app.js. We have the index route right here mounted on the home path. This slash just means the home path. So that means when we run the project, we will be invoking the index route right here. And like I said, we're going to remove all of this and replace it with our own stuff. But let's go ahead and run it real quick just to make sure everything works. So when the install is done, you should see something like this. Let's go ahead and run it by running the serve command, npm run serve. If you're not familiar with where this is coming from, if you look at the package.json, you'll see in the scripts we have a serve command right here, which gives us the dev server. Which runs the dev server. So npm run serve, and then it's going to run the dev server on localhost 3000. So if we head over to a browser and open up localhost 3000, we have the scaffolded project. So this is the project that works out of the box, and like I said, this is coming from the index route file. So that's going to be this file right here. Let's turn off the server by doing Control-C. So go ahead and turn it off, and let's go ahead and remove the default stuff, the default content, and let's insert our own stuff instead so that we can take over the UI. So head over to app.js, and we have our routes imported and configured here. Let's go ahead and just remove all of these, and let's create our own import. So we want to, import our own route, which we're going to call main. We're going to import that from the routes folder, and it's going to be the main.js file. And then we have to mount it onto the home path like that. So the home page will now invoke the main route file right here. Of course, we don't have that file because we didn't create it yet. So if we click on the routes folder here and create a new file like that, we have to create the main.js over here, and this will be the route file that handles our main routing request for the home page. So we need to import Express first, and then we need to create a router to handle the routing requests. Let's go ahead and export it. this enables us to use it in other areas of the project. I tend to do this first right away because oftentimes I forget, so this is easy to forget. So rather than make that even possible, I just go ahead and export it right away. Let's set up a route handler for get requests. The handler, well, this is going to handle the home page request. That's what this slash means right here. The router takes an argument, a function argument, which has 3 of its own arguments: rec, res, and next. This stands for request, response, and don't worry about next for now. Basically, what we need to do here is define a response for the main route. This is the main route response. And let's go ahead and make sure that this works. So we have it imported in the app.js. We're using it right here in the home page request. So if we go ahead and run this, this should work. So let's head over to localhost 3000, and this is what we see, and that's correct. So let's go ahead and turn off the server now, and let's go ahead and set up a template, a HTML template to render instead of this raw string right here. So the templates are stored in the views directory, and you'll see one template already called index.mustache, and this is the original homepage. You may be wondering what that mustache extension means. It's a templating engine. We're using the mustache templating engine. That's the default configuration in the Turbo scaffold. And that makes it a lot easier to inject dynamic data. And that's why you see this mustache extension, but don't let it throw you off. It's just an HTML document. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to get rid of this. And we're going to create our own template called home.mustache, like so. This is going to be an HTML. This is just an HTML document. So like I said, don't let the mustache extension throw you off. And we're going to just set up a simple HTML page template. Very, very basic, just to make sure that it properly works. So right here, let's go ahead and create a header 1 tag, and let's say this is the home page, like that. And now what we want to do is we want to render this template in the main route. So instead of send, we want to render it, like so, render. And here we pass in just the name of the template. So we want to render the home template. We don't need the mustache extension. The templating engine already knows what extension to look for. So now we can run npm run serve. And we should see this is the home page, which is the template we just set up over here. So everything is properly connected. Let's go ahead and turn off the server now. And let's remove these previous routes just to minimize any possible confusion. Just keep it nice and clean. So now we have our main route, our home template. It's properly connected in the app.js. And we have confirmed that everything is rendering properly. So we're good to go as far as importing the new theme. So let's go ahead and integrate the theme. And like I said earlier in the video, you can check the description section of the YouTube video as well as the Turbo tutorial page wherever you're watching this, and look for the download link for the theme. And we're going to use that theme to replace this HTML template. So the theme is, let's get rid of this right here, this zip file. So you should have this zip file downloaded. Let's open that up, and you're going to get this right here. And inside here, you're going to see a collection of HTML files and folders, a bunch of files and folders. So what we need to do is import these static assets into our project. So static assets are basically CSS files, images, JavaScript files, and so on. So these need to be imported into our project. So let's go ahead and do that first. So if we open up our project pod search, The static assets in our project are stored in the public directory. That's the default configuration option for that. So we're going to open up the public directory, and you're going to see more or less the same folders except fonts. So we have CSS, images, and JS already in the default configuration. But instead, we're going to use the themes version instead. So what I'm going to do is just take all 4 of these folders and just move them over into our project. So just go ahead and slide these over like that, and go ahead and replace what they have in here. And then the home page of the theme is index.html. So we want to take this, let's open this up in Visual Studio or whatever text editor you're using. And we want to use all this HTML instead. So let's go ahead and highlight the whole thing and just copy it. So just Command A and Command C. And click out of that. And go back to our home mustache template and remove what we had over here and just paste our contents instead. So we just copied and pasted from one file to another. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And this should be our theme integration. So let's go ahead and run the npm run serve. And let's check the home page on localhost 3000. And now we have the theme integrated from the theme folder into our project on localhost 3000. So hopefully you see the same thing. That means your theme integration was successful. What I'm going to do next real quick is throw this up on a staging server on Turbo just to make sure it works on a staging environment. And so that way we can be certain that what we do locally on our machine will be accurately reflected on the staging environment on our actual hosting server. So let's go ahead and do that. Turn off the server in your terminal, so Control C, and then head over to your Turbo account. Just click over here, press account. First thing we need to do is create the new project on Turbo so that we have a hosting environment to deploy to. So I'm just going to give it the same name, pod search. The name doesn't have to be the same, but it's usually a good idea to keep the confusion down. So pod search. We're going to need the site ID and the API key in a few moments. So head back to your terminal, make sure the server is off, and you might need to do Turbo login so that you can log into your CLI as well. I'm already logged in, so I'm not going to do that, but do this right away and log into your account on your CLI as well so that you're authenticated. And then the next thing you need to do is Turbo connect, and this will connect the project to the remote hosting environment so that when you deploy, it knows where to go. So Turbo connect. So here it's asking for the site ID, so we just copy the site ID and we paste that guy in here. And then the API key, same thing, just copy and paste the API key. And what this does is it connects our project locally to the remote hosting environment so that when you deploy, it goes to this environment over here. Let's go ahead and do that just to make sure everything works. So the final command here is turbo deploy. I'm going to pause the video while this goes up because this normally takes about a minute or so. So make sure, hold on one second. Okay, so I'm going to press deploy and enter and then wait for the project to deploy. Okay, the deployment is up, and if it worked for you, you should see a similar output here. It gives you a staging URL where your project is being hosted, so we can just copy that guy and paste it into our browser and check whether or not it works the same on staging as it does on local, which it does. So everything works the same on staging. You can see here this is a staging link as it does on localhost. So that's good news. That means everything we're going to do locally should work on the remote environment as well, which means our project is properly configured on both local and staging. Great, so let's go ahead and do a few more configuration options to configure the project for React. So what we need to do is install a couple libraries for React to make sure that our project can basically run a React UI. So the first thing we need to do is install React, obviously. So npm install. We need to install React as well as the React DOM. We need both of these libraries because the React DOM is what enables us to essentially mount the React code onto an HTML template. That's essentially what's going on there. Just making sure I didn't forget to press record. Sometimes I forget to do that. And we do want to save this, so go ahead and do that. And then what we can do now, I'm just confirming that everything properly installed. So these are the React and React DOM versions we have. What we want to do now is set up our React code, our React source. So I'm going to create a directory for that in the root level called src. So just clicking on the package.json first, making sure everything is properly configured, and then let's create a new directory called src. This is where we're going to store all the React code. So inside the src, I'm going to create an index.js, and here is going to be our entry point for the React code. So here's where we start writing actual React. So we have to import React naturally, and we also have to import the React DOM. And let's create an app component. And this is going to return a div. This is the React entry point. And then we need to mount this component using the React DOM. And then we're going to use the render command, and we're going to create a component out of it like that. And then we grab the document, get element by ID, and we're going to mount it onto the root tag of the document. So basically what we're doing here is we're creating a very simple component called app. It's just going to render this div tag, and that's it with this content inside. And then we're going to render this component right here using document get element by ID, and the React DOM is going to do the rendering for us. This is why we needed to import the React DOM as well as React. So a couple things here. First of all, we need to now render this code inside of an HTML document. So what I'm going to do is create another template inside the views directory. Let's call it index.mustache. And in here, we're just going to have another very simple HTML document. Okay. Now, if you look at the actual React code, you'll see that it's looking for an element by ID named root. That means we need a div tag inside the React template, the template that's mounting the code with that ID. So we need to create a div right here. Whose ID is root. So what that means is React will find this div because it has the ID that the React DOM is looking for, and it's going to render all the code that we tell it to, which is going to be this right here, inside the root right here. It's going to show up in here. So that's what's supposed to happen. However, we don't have any React code being imported in here yet. First thing we want to do is render this index mustache. Right, so I'm going to create another route inside the main.js, and I'm going to have it called React. and then we're going to render the index template using the React endpoint right here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go back to our index mustache, and then I'm going to just put in another header 1 tag right here. This is the React page. Okay, so let's go ahead and test that. So here's the home page, and then if we do React, we have this is the React page. So now the question is, how do we get the root here to actually render this React code? So I'm going to get rid of this. What we need to do next in order to make that happen is we need to import the React code, which is just going to be a JavaScript file, and that's it. This is going to be a JavaScript file, text, JavaScript. I'm going to import it. The problem is we can't import this directly, unfortunately. We have to import it a compiled version. So the question then becomes, where do we actually import this from? Well, the first thing we need to do is compile the React code because this code right here is actually not valid JavaScript. This is what's called JSX. So this JSX code has to be compiled or transpiled, depending on who you talk to, into just valid JavaScript. And that's done through a transpiler that we're going to use to transpile this code called Webpack, which is by far the most common transpiler or bundler that developers use to transpile React code. So luckily, the Turbo CLI gives us a very simple command to integrate Webpack into our project. It's very simple. We do turbo extend Webpack, and then that will configure our project to have a Webpack bundler for our code. We're going to use the React option, obviously. So it's asking us here, which one do you want to configure it for, React or Vue? We're going to use React. And what this is going to do is install the necessary libraries as well as the Webpack default Webpack configuration so that we can go ahead and transpile our code into our React code into valid JavaScript, which makes life a lot easier rather than setting all this up from scratch. So this should be done in about a minute, and then we can use it to actually transpile our code or compile. Okay, so now it's done, and you'll see here it says Webpack config.js file added to project root directory. So what we can do now is head over here, and you'll see a new file called Webpack config.js. And in here, basically all you need to know, well, the main thing you need to know is that the entry point is where we tell Webpack where to find the React code. So you'll see it says src index.js. That's right here, src index.js. So if we had given this a different name like src and then app.js, we would have to change this to app.js. And then equally important is where the compiled code is going to go. So it's going to go here in the public dist folder. So we have public, and then it's going to create another folder called dist for distribution, and then it's going to insert the compiled code in there. And that's the code we need to import in our page in here. So let's go ahead and run that compile command. The way you do that is if you open up the package.json, you'll see we have a new command here called build, which runs basically Webpack after a few prep commands. So if we do npm, or actually dev is a better option. We can also run the dev command, which runs Webpack in development mode, which gives us more debugging options to make it easier to find errors and things of that sort. So what we want to do is actually open a new tab right here. Make sure you're in the root of the project, and we want to run npm run dev. And you'll see what happens is in here a new folder comes up called dist, And inside there, there's going to be a few files, app.js and commons.js. We're going to need both of these, but these are the imported files that we need to import in order to run our React code. It's very important to understand that. It's inside the dist and then the bundle folder. So if we go back to our index mustache, here we actually need to import both of those. So we need to import the dist bundle and then commons.js, and then another one for app.js, like that. And these two files combined comprises our React code. So if you go back to our React code, src index.js, you'll see this is the React entry point. So now what we can confirm is if we head over here and reload the React page after we turn on the server, so npm run serve, we have this is the React entry point. And that's how you do a basic React setup for using Webpack and a very simple React component. Now, the last thing we're going to do is run the production build. So head over to this terminal and turn off the server, Control-C, on both of these actually. And we're going to run the production build and then throw it up on the staging server to make sure this also works on the staging environment. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So we do npm. Over here we do npm run. This time we do the run build, because here we have to run a production compile script, which will give us the non-development React code, which is what we want on the server. So we do npm run build. And you'll see here it took out the dist folder and then recreated it, and then it generated our app.js and our commons.js again. So that's correct. We can just run it locally as well. It still works. And then let's throw this up on our staging environment just to make sure everything works on staging the same way it does on local. I'm going to pause this just like before while it's going up. Okay, the deployment is up on staging. Let's go ahead and check out that endpoint on staging this time and see if everything still works. So here's the home page. Let's check out the React page, and we have the React entry point. So now we are running the React code on the staging server as well. And you can see we have the same setup on staging as we do on local, and everything still works. So that was a very simple React setup and configuration for a very basic project. Hopefully you got that working. Basically, this confirms that our configuration is properly set up and ready to go. So in the next video, we're going to begin carving up this template into reusable React components that we can use to create our site, our app. We're going to use a lot of different tools and libraries to search podcasts and stream the audio and things like that. So hopefully you got everything working. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.